as with the other ones, we're taking the same basic approach to start with, which is looking at the dimensions of our piece. We're going to look at the width of our photograph, which in this instance is just slightly wider than my pencil, versus the height. The highest point is probably this point here, and that's probably the lowest point there. So it's about 3/4 as high as it is wide overall. So if I put my markers on my page again, I'm going to stick it about there. If that's the full width, then the 3/4 will be there-ish. None of these things are set in stone. It's just that's the basic shape that I want my flower to fall within. Now, the main thing I'm going to look at here is the frill, the actual trumpet part of the daffodil. Let's look at that. Where is that in amongst everything that we just drew? Is it here? Is it there? We need to establish where that needs to be anchored, because a lot of the rest of it hangs off of that, literally, with the petals hanging off the centre part of the flower. Looking at the height here, if I were to put a marker there, that's the overall height of my drawing. Whereabouts within that does this sit? So halfway along that height would be about there. Okay, I'm not measuring this accurately. You don't need a ruler. We don't need to know it's 5.2 centimetres or whatever. We're not that accurate. But that's about halfway, that bit there, and then equal. So we can see that the top of the frill comes to about halfway up the height of what we've got here. So similarly, I'm just going to put a mark about halfway up. That's the top of my frill. The other thing I need to establish is where does it sit within the width? Is it here, here? So let's work that out as well. Let's put a mark here and a mark here. And that establishes the overall width of the flower. Now, is this about halfway across? Probably is. If you were to draw a mark down the middle of there, that to there and that to there are about the same. So we can fairly confidently say it sits in the middle. So this point here on the flower is this point here on my drawing. The next thing I'm going to do is think, how deep is that? It doesn't come all the way down to the base of the drawing because we need space for these petals here to show. So in that depth there, maybe slightly more than halfway down, so it comes down to there-ish. And then I need to look at the width of it. So if it's that high, how wide is it? It's about 1.5 times as wide as it is high. So if that's the height, 1.5 times that, it's going to be kind of there-ish. Okay, so we've got a few little marks in there now. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm not going to bother about drawing the frilliness of this shape. I'm just going to very lightly map out a kind of oval. It's not oval because obviously it's very irregular. It sticks out more on this side than it does on that side. But we're just saying, like, roughly that's where that bit is going to go. That's as accurate as we need to be for a minute. The other thing we need to do then is look at what's going on up here. Where's the neck of the trumpet? So if we were to come straight up there, we've got this crease which is just slightly off centre. But how deep is that? Well, again, looking at the depth of this, that is about half as deep there. Now, this is where a lot of people go wrong when they draw things like this, because your brain knows that this bit is quite long, but because of the way the flower is being photographed, it looks shorter. You have to go with what you see, not with what you think you know. So we're going to keep that roughly half the size of the depth of our trumpet. And we can see that it's got a bit of an angle there, and then it's got a bit of an angle that comes just this side of the centre line. Okay, so we'll map those in. And then we need to think about how does that then join up onto here. So looking, again, if that was an upright, looking at the shape of that angle, that was an upright. It's kind of like that, kind of curves in slightly. The same on this side. That curves down, not all the way though, but let's just do that for a minute, just as a marker. Okay, so we're starting to get the shape of our trumpet here. Next thing we need to do is look at our petals and think, where do they go to? So, it doesn't really matter which one we start with. I'm going to start with this one because I've already got a line here coming up as my marker of the edge of my trumpet. Looking at that, this bit here comes out and then goes up. So out and goes up. We've got that bottom bit there. And then it comes out and up in that direction past that centre line for the overall flower. We don't know how far to take that for a minute. We do know that if we drew a straight line across there, this petal doesn't go as high as the one on this side. So if that's our top line, we're not going to go all the way up to there. We've got this awkward little crease. And we've got this point. So we're going to come down to about there for this point. We're going to bring that across. We're going to come over, back, over, and that comes down, not to the middle, but almost to the point where the trumpet is. And then we go up slightly, we come out, kind of in a bit of an arch. It's a wiggly arch, but it's still an arch. And then we come in, and then we scoop that round to join up to there. So that's more or less right. I'm not going to be too accurate at this point. You have to remember, if you're drawing something like a flower, the important thing is that it looks like the flower it's meant to be. Nobody is going to look at your drawing and compare it to this and say, this frill bit is not quite the same shape as that frill bit. So don't get too caught up in making it 100% accurate, because you'll be there all day. And again, if we're doing this as a preparation for on a canvas for a painting, we don't care about that detail at this stage. We're trying to get it mapped out, trying to get it all the right shape. So moving on to this petal. Okay, let's just use this as another marker. So sketch that in there. So the top of our petal is coming here-ish. You know, so we're kind of using the grid method, but without actually drawing a full-on grid on our page. We're just putting some marker points in to help guide our eye. That comes out like that, and then kind of just that. A little curve here. And then this point joins back in more or less level with the bottom of that curve. So we can bring that round. Okay, that'll do that for a minute. Then we'll look at this one. So this one comes up and then down. And then down, meets that one. And then where does the bottom of it come to? Well, the tip is about halfway, level with about halfway up our trumpet. So the tip's about there. And this is our widest point. So our tip is going to be here. So it comes back, goes up, constantly looking back, picture to drawing all the time. My eyes are scanning back and forth between the two. Comes in, comes down. And then it's about halfway up, as I say. Comes down a little bit. And then comes around like that. Okay, so I'm happy with that one. Now at the moment, that one looks bigger than this. I'm not going to worry about that. The reason it looks bigger is because on this, we've got this bit of frill that's sticking out into this space. We haven't drawn that in yet. So just trust it. That will be more or less correct. Moving around to the next one. So if that's our centre point on our trumpet, we've got a gap. So if that's our centre point again, we've got a gap. So it comes out about there. We know this is the lowest point on the picture, so it comes all the way down to this point here. So it comes down, comes round in a scoop. It's got a little point bit on it. And it comes out of that point of that petal there. Comes round. It's got a little crease. Nice to get a little bit of detail like that in because it makes it more realistic. And that's all we need to do for that one. Similarly on this side, that's our centre point. We need to work out where this edge of the petal comes. About halfway up the neck of the trumpet, about there. Comes down at that kind of angle. Now this one has quite a lot of little nips out, little creases. Bring that one that way. And this is where you can just use your judgment. Roughly where do they meet up? Kind of like that, maybe a little bit longer on that side actually. So that's more or less it for that one. We've got one more petal to do, which is this big one over here. So again, that comes out not halfway up the trumpet, a bit more than halfway up the trumpet. So it comes out about there. It starts 2/3 of the way down this line. It's about there. And we know it comes all the way out to here. So we've established where it starts here and here. We don't know where it ends up on this point. Is it up here or is it down there? So again, we try and find a reference point. If we were to draw a straight line across there, more or less comes out where this one meets here. So that will be our centre point. That will be where that little pointy bit is. Comes out, goes in and out a little bit. And then similarly down here. Okay, so I think we've got a shape more or less there. That's the very basic outline. What we need to do now is think a little bit about some of the details. We start looking at our frill, and straight away we can see that we've got an edge here that's quite a defined edge, but very irregular. So we can bring that out a little longer here. Bring it back out. Don't get caught up in every little detail and try to make this a complete mirror perfect image of the frill that's on this side. All we're trying to do is get an effect that there is a frill. It doesn't have to be mega accurate. Nobody's going to know, as long as it looks like a daffodil frill. So we're looking at this point here. I've just sketched that one in. This actually comes up and meets. See there? You've got a line here and a line there. And then round here, it comes out. And this is where it sticks out quite a lot. Maybe even a little higher. Sticks out quite a lot into that shape there. And then it comes down. A bit of a dip in. Another little frilly bit. There. And then that's as far as I'm going to go there in a minute. I'm going to come back up here and think, right, that starts further back than this one. So that starts back there, comes out, comes down here, not just going, comes out further there actually. Okay, so we've got a frill, and it's fairly, kept it reasonably accurate to there, but again, I'm not going to lose any sleep if it's not quite right, because nobody cares. And then we can start looking at where we've got these lines coming in. Just very lightly sketching those in, remembering that all these lines, that they are converging to this point down here. This is where you can just about see where the stamen is. The stamen comes out there, and all of these creases are heading down towards that point. So on this side, they're going in this angle. On this side, they're going in this angle. There's a little bit of the same on the outside. Right, I think I'm happy with the shape. The next thing I'm going to do is use my eraser and get rid of all of those grid lines before I start putting any shading in, because there's no point in trying to shade it and then realising that you've got a line you need to get rid of. So you are left with a reasonably tidy drawing. So all of those markers that we put in earlier, get rid of anything we don't want at this stage before you go too far. Because trust me, you'll be cursing if you've got lines left there that you can't get rid of afterwards without rubbing out something that you do want. Now again, if this was for a painting, this would be enough. You don't need to do anything else. That would be enough to be a decent line drawing to put down on your canvas to be able to paint this daffodil. For the sake of completeness, we're going to go on, we're going to put some shading in it just to be able to learn a bit more about depth and value. I am now going back to my 8B and I'm going to start trying to put some depth in there. So my first thing is, I ask myself, where are the darkest bits? Obviously, this whole centre here is reasonably dark. There's very little light in there at all. There is a little bit of dark here, and there's a little bit of dark here, and the rest of it is mostly going to be lightish greys, or maybe even a little bit of dark there as well. So we start with our darks. That's how I tend to work. So I'm going to look at, just before I do, I'm just going to put in that slight shape of that stamen that sits in there as well. Can't really see much of it. It's just like a little rectangle. Okay, now I'm working, the angle I'm at is, I'm not going completely flat, so I'm not working completely on the flat edge of the pencil, but I'm also not working off the tip. I'm going somewhere in between, so I can get that softness of the shading without the hard lines that the tip would give me. But it's still fairly accurate. Now I'm filling up the whole of this section because I know there is no white paper going to be left here. The whole thing is going to be dark. Not mega dark, but there's nothing in there that's even approaching white. It's all various shades of grey. Stop sniggering at the back. So we'll just get some basic coverage over it all to start with. Bearing in mind that if you did decide you wanted to bring something out a little bit brighter, you could go back in with a pencil eraser afterwards. Cut some highlights through this if you wanted. Okay, so that's greyed out the whole thing. Now where are the darkest bits? In the centre is where it's darkest. So I'm doing the same thing again, slight more pressure, but still not pressing very hard and still definitely not getting any lines in it. Again, I will come back and put a little bit of grey over that as well because it's barely visible really. Now at this point I need to start thinking about building up the effect of some of these creases. Still not working completely off the tip, but I start to get some of this liney effect in there. Changing the angles of the lines as I go to mirror what I said about them coming in towards the centre of the base. Now there's the odd little bit here where we can go in with the tip, because if you look here, it's almost like it's got an outline. It's not heavy, it's not wide. There's a little bit more detail here. There's a little fold. For the sake of demonstration, I'm trying to keep it accurate to the drawing, but you absolutely don't have to. but just try and get these shapes in there, in that you've got the irregular frill. It doesn't do this. Yeah, it's very irregular, and that's what makes it look more natural, less like a cartoon. Okay, so that'll probably do for that bit for a minute. I could be there all day making it super duper accurate, but this is just a sketch. So happy with that bit. I now need to look at the neck, which is obviously considerably lighter, but has the same kind of effect of these soft areas of shading going through them. So this is where I am more working on the edge. I want to get that shape there, just a little bit more onto the tip for that. So we get that effect of that crease that's running up there. Then a little bit of grey on this side. It might feel like I'm going very dark with this. Don't be scared of it, because when you look at your picture here, most of this is grey. The only white really is on the tops of some of these petals. That's the only bit that we'll probably end up leaving as blank paper. All of this is going to be covered. So don't be afraid of that. Just that soft grey over the whole area. Cutting in those shapes. Okay, so that's enough for that for a minute. This is only going to be a quick sketch. Now I'm going to start looking at the petals. Now, as I say, this area here is probably the whitest of the whole lot. There's a little dark crease runs up through there. There's another little dark crease that runs back through there. And then we've got this big area of white. As it comes up here, it gets slightly greyer. Now this here is darkish, fading in this direction. So applying a bit more pressure there and then just less pressure as I come further away. And that's what gives you that nice graduation from dark to light. Feathering that out. We've got another darkish crease here. Comes up to meet that bit. This is all grey. It's not white. Even though it's lighter, it's still not white. You notice you've got this, I don't know if you can pick it up on the camera, but there is a slight texture, lininess to the flower. So we can try and capture some of that by putting our pencil strokes in the same direction. And it's a little lighter on this edge, darkening it there. Soft graduation at that point. Okay, I still want to make that area just a little bit lighter, so I'm going to go back in with my pencil eraser and just cut a little bit of that back out. If you've decided you've put on too much pencil at this point, you can also use the pencil eraser to emphasise some of those creases in the petal too. That's also a really nice effect. So that's that one petal there done. The other one's a case of rinse and repeat, really. Looking at each one, thinking where's the darkest, where's the lightest, and then at the end of it, we'll compare them all to each other. So I'm going to fast forward through that section now and show you the end result. At this point, I'm just showing you that I'm turning the page because I'm struggling to get the lines to go in the right angle because my hand wasn't at the right angle. So I'm getting myself so I can move easily from the wrist. Okay, that's happy with that. Just got one more petal to do. So we've got everything more or less mapped out. Now we need to double check everything. What I'm seeing very clearly here is that my values on my centre of the trumpet are not the same as the values in the picture. Mine is considerably lighter because if you look here, everything in there is much darker than pretty much everything on the outside. So mine is too close. I need to darken all of this. At this point, if you want, you could go in with your smudging tool and start softening some of this if you don't like the grainy effect that the paper gives you. But you absolutely don't have to do this bit. It's just depending on what you like. Sometimes you can do a little bit of that and then still go back in and darken a few areas just to pull the creases back out. You can go back and forth with these things. Nothing is set in stone. Equally, if you've done that and you think, oh, that now looks too dark, we could go back in with our pencil eraser and pull some bits back out again to create some highlights. But this is enough. If you've achieved this and you've got something that looks the same shape and more or less the same values as your reference picture, you know that you've made a big leap forward in your drawing skills. Thank you for watching. I hope you found it helpful. If you feel like you've not got the results you want, watch it again and go through it a second time, because I promise you, the more times you do it, the better you will get. If you found this video useful and you'd like to work with me further, I do offer one-to-one coaching, which you can book through my website, wendybrownfineart.co.uk. Happy drawing.